Welcome to Conversations with the Planets with Lori Kaufman and Alicia Cielle Heiser, a podcast that roots the wisdom of the stars into our lived experiences here on Earth and weaves the power of diverse healing modalities together with astrology. And today we're going to be wrapping up our Essential Dignity series that we've been working on by talking about mutual reception and what that means and how to work with that in a birth chart. And we have released several episodes at this point about talking about the nuanced ways that you can look at the condition of a planet in your birth chart, and all of those episodes are linked down below. And so please go check out the other episodes. There's lots of fun ways to see if you have a planet in its own bounds, or a planet with triplicity, or a planet that's exalted, or, maybe how to work with planets that might have more like difficult condition in the theory. And we really try to dig into like, even when planets are in fall or detriment, that's not like a bad thing. That just means that you might like experience life in a way that's more atypical or less traditional or less conventional, which actually can be really good in a lot of ways. And so we really try to like reimagine what that means.
Mhm.
So yeah, please go check out our other Essential Dignity episodes. But the last one we're going to talk about is mutual reception, which is when planets are in each other's signs. So, I mean, Lori's chart is just an amazing example. She has,
Yeah.
Mars in Cancer and the Moon in Aries, mutually receptive to each other. And that is something that gives planets more dignity. It can be a little extra boost because it's kind of like if you were going to go stay in your friend's house and they were going to go stay in your house. And so you want to make sure it's like extra nice and really help them out, and you're like texting them like where things are, as opposed to if you're just staying in an Airbnb or like a hotel or something, you're not going to have that same
Yeah.
reception that you might have from a friend. And so it's kind of like that when planets are in each other's signs, they have more of an interest in being good hosts to each other and giving each other more support.
Yeah, and, I mean, just real quick, at like Alicia said, like, please go listen to the domicile episode first, because it's super important to understand what it means to have a planet in their home before you start to think about mutual reception. But once
And
you
also
dive
just
in.
quickly to say that
Yeah,
the domicile episode is called "What Does It Mean to Have a Planet It's in Its Own Sign?" So
yeah.
just because it doesn't have domicile in its name to
Oh, it
help you
doesn't.
find that.
Okay. Perfect. Good call. But yeah, so a mutual reception, I actually have 2 in my chart,
Mhm.
and I love talking about them. Because I have 2 very different mutual receptions. I have my Mars and Moon, which are very loud. They are mutually or doubly applying into a square with each other, because my Mars is retrograde and my Moon is at the very top of my chart. I'm a Cancer rising, so my moon is my chart ruler. And my moon is conjunct my MC, and Mars is conjunct my ascendant. Um, so it's pretty much the loudest mutual reception I think you could possibly have.
Mhm.
um,
Especially with that Aries, like,
yeah,
just loud.
right. Just loud. Yeah, very, very, very visible. And because I think they see each other too, and they are squaring each other, it's a very cardinal energy. It's very loud, it's very big, it's very like just go, go, go. And I really have found, and I have a day chart too. So Mars is my malefic out of sect. Um, so I always see it as like that is the loudest thing in my chart. Like those 2 cannot be separated.
Mhm.
I like physically cannot remove my Aries moon from my Cancer Mars. I feel like both of them manifest very loudly in different ways, but it's almost like having the energy of an Aries moon and a Cancer moon, and then having the energy of a Cancer Mars and an Aries Mars. It's
Mm.
almost like because they're in each other's signs, they can kind of like tap into each other's energy at any point. And I've been noticing some weird things about myself lately. Like just how those 2, I've been really trying to like lean into the energy of what does it mean to have a mutual reception, because I knew we were
Mhm.
going to do this episode, and I've even realized like I crab claw, like I do this all the time, like I eat like this, like
So Cancer.
it's so Cancer, but it's also so chaotic in Aries too, like it's so Mars. um and yeah, like I just noticed that those 2 energies are just always so loud and prevalent and prominent. But I also have a mutual reception
Can we
between.
actually
Yeah,
stop and just talk about those, and then we can get into
sure.
your other, like, let's just do that, because one
Yeah.
thing that So one thing I'm just thinking of as you're talking, right? Because it's a dignity thing, right? That then your Mars,
Yeah,
especially your Mars in Cancer, is in fall.
right.
Um, and so it's like it doesn't have a lot of dignity, but then it has almost accidental dignity by being
Yeah,
on the ascendant, which is like the angles are these boost points where if a planet's on an angle, it just is
yeah,
given more energy and support and like not necessarily support, but it's given more energy and prominence. And the first house is like the best of the angles, and then because it's in mutual reception with your moon, it just has so much support, and so that's like a mitigating factor
yeah.
for your fallen Mars that you have that. And
Mhm.
so again, it's like resourcing, right? If you're staying, like if I went and
Yeah,
stayed in Lori's house, like she would make sure it was set up very, very well for me. And it would be a lot more comfortable because a friend was interested in that, right? And it, like, so that mutual reception, because they're both hosting each other, they have an interest in taking good care of each other.
right.
Because if the moon is in charge of what Mars is doing in Lori's chart, Mars wants to make sure the moon's doing well because then Mars is doing well, right? And that's the mutual part is they both have that interest. And then just one quick story that I think really highlights Lori's like Mars privilege almost, or like the benefit of your Mars
Yeah,
energy. Cause like you would not think that Lori would be able to work with Mars energy as easily as she does because it's in fall, but like your Mars is so strong and effective in your life.
yeah,
And when we were in Greece, we were at an Ares temple in
yeah.
Athens that was just rebel, first of all, which is also very Mars.
I
And
posted a
Lori
picture
went,
of it on my Instagram too, if anyone wants to see it.
and like when you go to the temples in Greece, like there's just these angry like staff workers blowing
Yeah.
whistles constantly. Like Saturn is very present. They're like, don't touch this, don't do this, don't disrespect this, which makes perfect sense, right? Because these are tourist destinations. They're also sacred sites, and a lot of people are just coming for like their next Instagram photo or whatever. But we were also on a pilgrimage and we're like really connecting with the sacred energy of the sites and really trying to honor and respect them. We weren't just there for like the TikTok. But Lori goes and sits on kind of like the entrance stone of the RA's temple to get a picture. And it's fine. It's like nothing happens. She gets her picture, all that. And then our friend goes to sit on the thing, and the staff person like invokes, I don't even think she realized that she was like invoking RAs and invoking
Yeah,
Mars, but she
right.
got so mad at us and she came and just started yelling at us and telling us how disrespectful we were and how
Yeah,
we
she got
had to get off
screamed
the
at.
temple. And we like all walked away, and the woman like kept yelling at us and she was like glaring at us, and I'm like, can we
Following
move out
us.
of her sight, because I feel like she's throwing curses at us. Like she got so excessively mad at us. It was such a Mars, it was like Mars is here. But I think that just really captures like Lori's mutual reception, that like she was protected by Mars and she was protected by
Yeah,
Aries. And then it was our friend who kind of invoked the anger
yeah.
of Mars. So,
Yeah, and I think accidental dignity is such a perfect way of saying it too, because you would think that a person who has a fallen retrograde Mars in a day chart, my Mars is not having a good time. Like it should not be helping me at all. But because it's only 6 degrees away from my ascendant, it had just risen. It is in that mutual reception to my moon, my chart ruler. It really does have a lot of dignity and say over things. Um, and actually, I want to share another funny story because I actually didn't know this until about a week ago, but I was talking to my mom. Um, and she actually, for whatever reason, I didn't invoke this. Like she just started telling me this story. But my birth story when I was born, apparently I was kind of emergency set. Like I was basically like it would have been fine, but I had to be sent into like an emergency situation because I was squeezing my umbilical cord. And so what's funny is if I was born at the time that they expected me to be born, I would have actually been a Leo rising. But right as Mars crossed the ascendant, I started squeezing the umbilical cord, almost like trying to kill myself, basically, cutting off my airflow. And like they basically had to emergency make my mom push because I was sitting there like a little
you're like,
crab.
I'm ready to come out. I'm going to
Yeah.
be a Mars
Hello,
rising.
I want to be a Cancer
Like,
rising.
now is the time.
Right. Right. And when she was telling us that story and we were just laughing because I was like, that is the most Mars in Cancer on the ascendant mutual reception to the Aries moon story I've ever heard. Like,
Like death by birth,
right.
deciding when you're gonna like come into the
Right.
world. Like, yeah,
Yeah.
that's so literal.
It's so literal. And so, and that's another thing, like just a quick caveat, like this is so unrelated, but I love to look at your chart as like a transit chart,
Hmm.
how like to tell your birth story, because I think that's so funny and interesting. And like I've done that a lot for myself, for clients, and like mine is very literal and funny. But that was just another one of those things where it's like it was probably the exact time that Mars was on the ascendant because it's 6 degrees above,
Hmm.
that I was probably started to squeeze. So, yeah,
That's
things like
crazy.
that can be very funny. Yeah.
I love that. Yeah, it is looking at our birth charts as transit charts, also transit charts to our
Yeah.
parents. That's a major transit in their
Yes.
lives. And then
Totally.
I always describe like we're born and then we take our first breath, and the first breath is like very significant in Hellenistic like
Mhm.
theory around astrology. Like the ascendant
Yes.
is the place where the breath comes through and the life comes through. So you're born and you take this first breath, and like the energy of where the planets are in that moment is like imbued into you, and then you become a talisman for that. So it's like it is a
Yes.
transit story, and then it
Totally.
also you just become an embodiment of that
Yeah.
forever then.
Yeah. That's awesome.
Yeah, so yeah, I guess that's the first place to look at, because there's mutual reception becomes such an interesting conversation with astrologers, and there's a lot of different
Mhm.
nuance and theory about it. But the
Yes.
most obvious, clear form of mutual reception is the type of example that we just used with Lori, where the starting point for any mutual reception is the planets each have to be in each other's signs. And then,
Mhm.
especially if they can see each other by aspect. So, Aries and Cancer can very easily see each other. They're receiving each other. There's a line of communication. Like, I go to stay in Lori's house, she stays in my house, and we're like calling each other, like, hey, where are the towels? We can easily access each other.
Yeah.
Um, you can also, within that, throw in the nuance of the dignity of each planet. And
Mhm.
that's where Lori encouraging you to go listen to the what does it mean to have a planet in its own sign, or like also looking at the exaltation episode, the fall, like Lori's fallen
Yeah.
Mars, or the detriment episode, understanding the dignity of each planet, like
It helps
I don't
it.
know. Yeah, like Mars in Scorpio trining the moon in Cancer would be a very wait, no, that's a bad example. I guess Mars okay, well, that's actually let's use the opposite. Mars in Cancer trining the
Yeah.
moon in Scorpio could be like um two drunk friends stumbling home together. So like they're
Right.
trying to help each other out, but like Mars and Cancer and the moon and Scorpio, like because the moon's fallen in Scorpio, right? So then it's two fallen planets, and you still have to deal with the actual dignity of it. So if the
Yeah.
both planets have difficult dignity, then like that might show up. And again, like we already said, just because a planet doesn't have dignity, like that might actually be good that you express that energy in a more unconventional way.
For
But there
sure.
probably will be some difficulties that come through with that, just because being unconventional tends to be difficult in this world.
Yeah, it can
But on
be.
the other end, I can't think of one quickly, but if you can think of like two planets in exaltation who are in mutual reception to each other, because if they're in their own sign, they're in their own sign. But like I guess like Saturn and Libra, and yeah, Venus and Capricorn would be like an interesting one, because then and actually Britney Spears has that
Yeah.
which is an example of her chart. But looking at the dignity of the planets can add additional nuance of like, well, what resources are we in? Like a penthouse
Yeah.
we're staying in each other's houses, or are we like camping in someone's backyard, or like what sort of
Yeah.
resourcing is available?
Yeah, and my other mutual reception is sort of like that. I have Venus in Pisces, and then I have my Jupiter in Libra. And so neither of them are in their fall or detriment. Like neither of them are poorly placed. Jupiter is neutral, but my Venus is exalted. But they're in a quincunx or blind spot to each other. So they're even though they are also in mutual reception, it doesn't feel nearly as loud as my other one, because, they're the 2 benefic planets, like, they're both helpful, um, but I liked the metaphor you used where it was like they're in each other's homes, but they just kind of, like, left nice notes and left a
Mhm.
chocolate on the pillow, and it's like, "Don't call me, I'm out of the country, but here's my home." You know what I mean? Like, it's
Mhm.
very they're helpful, but my Mars and Moon can communicate at any time. They can talk to each other, they can see each other. They in fact, they can't not.
Mhm.
Whereas the blind spots, they're not as helpful, but they still can boost each other a bit.
And that's
Um,
where the theory gets really nuanced and really interesting because different astrologers would have different things to say over whether
sure.
Lori's Venus, Jupiter are mutual reception or not. Like, there's no
Mhm.
debate that Lori's Moon and Mars are mutual reception. They're in each other's own signs. They can see each other by aspect. They also are pretty close in degree by aspect as well.
Yeah.
But the medieval astrologers in particular would say that if planets can't see each other, that it is not mutual reception because they're not receiving each other. And like when you get into aspect theory, when planets are in aversion to each other and can't see each other, that's actually viewed as the worst type of aspect because like if you can't contact your landlord when your fridge is broken, like you're out of luck. Like there's nothing to be done about that if you like literally
Sure.
can't even communicate, as opposed to like a square or an opposition might be tense, but at least there's still a line of communication. And so
Right.
it's so interesting because in our last episode talking about degrees, we were talking about like the theory versus real life and how there's like you can
Mhm.
learn the theory, but just because the theory says something doesn't mean it's true, right? And so it's
Yeah.
like we're here actually living it out and experimenting with it. And like yeah, Lori's chart's such a good example because yeah, exactly. I feel like Venus and
Mhm.
Jupiter in her chart left nice little notes on the pillow and tried to leave it nice for each other, but then like Venus is off in the Amazon and like Jupiter cannot reach her when he like needs help with like the Libra that he's in, you know? And so
Yeah.
the reception isn't as loud or as prominent. And there's a debate over whether there even is reception because they
Right.
can't see each other, but they're still, Jupiter wants Venus to be doing well because Venus rules Jupiter and vice versa. So
Right.
it's just a very interesting nuance.
Yeah, and I mean, the themes of those 2 houses are always gonna be tied together, like, the themes in my
Hmm.
4th house and my ninth house are always gonna be connected because each other's rulers are in each other's houses, so you can't really disconnect them, but, what's actually funny is when I first started learning astrology many years ago, um, my Moon Mars mutual reception for some reason was so loud to me that I didn't even fully understand what a mutual reception was, but I was like, "They're mutually recepted." Like, that's big. But it took me another, like, year to be like, "Oh, my Jupiter and Venus are too." And I was like, "That's so funny that I didn't
Hmm.
even notice they were
Yeah,
for
exactly.
a long
It's just not
time,"
as loud.
because right, like, they
Even though
just weren't
Lori's Venus is very angular, like Lori's MC is in
right,
Pisces. So while her moon is on her MC, her Venus is even more on her MC. And then Jupiter's in her fourth house, which is an angular house. So they're also
right.
both angular, but it's like the lack of sight is just not,
Yeah,
yeah, it makes it less obvious. And I'd say like less of a benefit,
right.
it's like it's still there, but
Yeah,
it's like Lori's accidental Mars dignity is very loud. And
right.
then like the dignity that Jupiter gets being ruled by an exalted Venus in mutual reception is just like not quite as
Helpful,
prominent.
but it's
It's
not
helpful.
like
It's not as loud.
yeah. Right. And I think that's a big thing is like when I do chart readings and I notice a mutual reception, there's a huge difference between the ones that I'm like, "Oh wow, like that's very mutually recepted," or "Oh, okay, they're in each other's homes, but they're not like screaming. Like they're not yelling at each other, they're not communicating, they're not, you know, they're just
Hmm.
kind of there." So, you can
Totally.
definitely feel the difference between the 2 things.
And then there's something too that's coming through for me about like the nuance of good and bad as well, because we're wrapping up
Mhm.
this essential dignity series and looking at like the nuance of how a planet is functioning in a chart. And I think it's really important to move away from the language of like, my Venus is bad because she's in Scorpio and Lori's Venus is good because she's in Pisces. And like, it's not that things are good or bad. It's like there might be more or less flow or ease or harmony. talking about resourcing and how well is a planet
Yeah.
resourced to bring about its significations, understanding that like Saturn in your chart is going to want to build structure and have boundaries and do things that last, and Venus in your chart is going to want to bring beauty and connection and pleasure, and like those planets are going to want to behave based according to their essential nature regardless.
Right.
And then understanding the zodiac signs as like a psychological environment or a habitat, that Saturn in Libra is going to have a lot, or like in Aquarius or Capricorn is going to have a lot that's congruent with the habitat it's in and what
Yeah.
it's trying to do. Whereas Saturn in Aries or Cancer or Leo is going to be in a habitat that's not, like my Venus in Scorpio is like trying to like fight and stab when she really just wants to like love and snuggle. It's like, I mean,
Right.
Venus and Scorpio can be very snuggly. Water signs can be snuggly, but it's
Sure.
it's the
Yeah.
habitat and how well equipped is a planet able to bring about what it signifies in your chart. And then the last nuance of that is what are the topics of the houses that the planet rules. So my Saturn in my chart is always going to be trying to build structure and things that last. But then Saturn in my chart is in charge of my fourth house of home and foundations and ancestors, and my fifth house of hobbies and pleasure and children. And so specifically, Saturn's going to be impacting those topics in my life. Whereas in Lori's life, Saturn's impacting her seventh house of relationships and her eighth house of shared resources. And so understanding the dignity of the planet can help you understand if those topics are flowing more easily or more difficult, or if there's resourcing around it. Is this something that just goes really well for you in your life? Is this something that might kind of trip you up? Is this something where it trips you up and it's kind of unconventional, but you actually really like it? Like that's where the
Yeah.
whole dignity is getting at, is the nuance. And so nothing is good or bad. And even with mutual
Yeah.
reception, like I'm thinking about Britney Spears's chart and that mutual reception, because she's a Libra rising. So she
Mhm.
has Saturn in Libra in the first house, and then Venus and Capricorn in the fourth house. And Saturn rules the fourth house, Capricorn, which in traditional astrology can be the father and is
Right.
definitely the family. And so that
Yeah.
exalted Saturn for many years in Brittany's life was really good for her family. Like Saturn is her
Yeah.
family literally in her chart because Saturn rules her fourth house of family. And her family was profiting exponentially off of all of her hard work and fame to her detriment, right? Because then Saturn is like maltreating Venus in Capricorn, and Brittany is Venus as a Libra rising. And so that mutual reception was there and is obviously very strong. Like I think most all of us know Brittany's
Yeah.
family story to a degree, but that doesn't necessarily mean that it was like good in Brittany's life. There's still so much nuance even with that, but it's definitely prominent, the conversation between Saturn and Venus in her life,
Right.
right? But it isn't necessarily, it's just there's so much nuance with our lives. Things aren't good or bad, but we can understand more like how does this feel, or what's the archetypal
Right.
nature of this by looking at the dignity.
Yeah. Yeah. Totally agree.
Cool. Well, do you have any other thoughts about mutual reception?
Let's see. I was trying to think if I had any other like examples that would be helpful for things that we haven't already talked about, but I don't think I do. I think
Yeah, I
we've
guess now that I
pretty much
have a
already hit it.
second to think of like a really strong one could be the sun in Aries square Mars and Capricorn. Like they're both exalted, and so they're both
Right.
like really resourced, and there's like but
Yeah.
yeah, so there's
Yeah,
like
that would be
different
a
ways
really
to kind of look
powerful
at that.
one.
Yeah.
I had
And
a
so
a client recently who had their sun in Cancer and moon in Leo. And they were like really close in degree. I think they were only like 5 degrees from each other.
mm,
Um, and so I just remember having a really long conversation about that. It was like right around a new moon, and but it like wasn't, and it was like such a specific new moon energy that they were like moving away from, and it just I do remember that one being really prominent because technically, like, by degree, they're conjunct, but by the theory of, like, them being in different signs, they were not, and they were in blind spot, and so, yeah, we had a very interesting, nuanced conversation about that. Um, so that one was a really interesting mutual reception to see.
that would be really interesting.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, there's just so much nuance there, just like all of our lives are
Yeah,
really nuanced. And,
exactly.
I think astrology can be really helpful to get more context and clarity around how different dynamics are playing in our lives. But still, what matters is our lived experiences, right? The theory is nothing without like the actual life to make sense of with that. And so,
Yeah,
it's just always like we can look at the chart and the technique, and then we should also step back into like our bodies and the actual living sky that we were born under and understand those and not just like get deep in the, books.
yeah,
Cool.
amazing.
Well, yeah, just kind of wrapping up. We are wrapping up our first season of the podcast, which is really exciting. We're going to do one more episode talking about Greece and what our experience in Greece was like because we just got back from Greece. And then we're going to take a little hiatus and do a few little updates to the podcast and come back in January of 2025. So please go follow our Instagram that's linked down below and just stay in touch with us while we're in this transition period. And as always, like please reach out to us if you have mutual receptions in your chart, if you see them in other people's charts. Like these examples are just so interesting to be like, how does this actually play out in people's lives, right? Like it's so helpful that Lori has the chart she has for this
Yeah.
episode to flesh out the nuance, and just hearing more about how mutual reception shows up in our listeners' lives is really interesting to us. So please reach
Yeah.
out if you have any stories about that.
Yeah, or
But
if you want to see anything specific in season 2 as well,
mhm.
feel free to send us that as well.
Please, yeah. And other than that, what do you have going on, Lori?
Yeah, I am offering readings as usual. I've been doing a lot of work with the asteroids still. If you have any asteroid stories, please feel free to reach out and share those. I've been really enjoying the ones that have been sent to me. Um, Otherwise, not too much else. What about you?
I am finally getting back into working after taking a lot of time off to recover from surgery and then burnout from surgery. And right now, I'm really working on building up my newsletter so that I share a lot of like just musings about astrology and mythology and herbalism, and then also updates on what my offerings are and different things I'm coming out with. And if folks sign up for my newsletter, they get a free downloadable guide to building ancestral relations. And so there's a link down below to sign up for my newsletter. And I would love if some folks would like sign up and engage with me that way. And I just want to build more relationship with the folks who listen to our podcast and stay in touch with y'all. And so that would be a really great way to engage with my work and kind of help support me as I'm building up my business. And yeah, other than that, I'm still writing blog posts about herbalism and different herbs and doing this podcast. And Lori and I both offer astrology readings. And so all of our information is down below if you want to reach out. And we just really appreciate everyone.
Yeah.
Cool. Bye, everyone.